Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. I want you to imagine it's the 1st of March, 1989. It's a Wednesday. We went to lectures this morning. You and I are studying different subjects, but we're going to take off for the afternoon and head into London. Right now, we're just outside London in Englefield Green, famous for two events, the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215 and where Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller stayed on their honeymoon in 1956. It's also the location of what is now called Royal Holloway, but was then called Royal Holloway and Bedford New College. It's one of the 18 institutions which make up the University of London, and I was a student there from 1988 to 1991. Royal Holloway was founded in 1879 and officially opened in 1886 by Queen Victoria, hence the royal moniker. Its official colours are purple and green, which, if you're a keen student of politics, you'll know are the suffragette colours. The university was a strong proponent of votes for women at the turn of the last century. Royal Holloway is beautiful, and its main building, called Founders, is extraordinary, created in the French Renaissance style, modelled on Château de Chambord in the Loire Valley. You'll recognise it. It's been the location of many movies and TV series, including Howard's End, Inspector Morse, and Call the Midwife. It also featured in The Split, a TV series I watched during lockdown, starring Nicola Walker and Stephen Mangan. Royal Holloway's Founders building appears in the episodes where the main characters go back to recall their university days. Although living and studying in a castle in the countryside was quite lovely, by 1989 I wanted to be in London as much as possible. Back to our imaginary day together. We've just had lunch in Boog, which is what we called the dining room at Royal Holloway, and popped back to our respective rooms and halls to grab our bags. To get into London, we're going to walk down Egham Hill to the station and catch the train to Waterloo. That will take a journey of 40 minutes into the city. When I was 19, this was enough time to read a much-loved paperback. Roger McGough, Philip Larkin, and Virginia Woolf were my favourites back then, and look winsomely out of the window. Feel free to do the same on our virtual visit today. We've now arrived at Waterloo. A train station has been here since 1869 and is the busiest terminus in the UK. I usually stop at the W.H. Smith near Platform 9 to buy a newspaper and some peppermints. So let's do that today. I'm getting The Guardian and The Independent, the newspaper I later trained on to become a journalist after graduating. There are lots of buses and connecting tube train routes, but let's walk up from Waterloo via the South Bank and over the River Thames, because there's nothing quite like crossing a river by a bridge. We'll also pass by the National Film Theatre. I think it's called something else now, but that was what it was known as when I lived in London. When I was 19, I was the film correspondent for the London Student newspaper and often went to the National Film Theatre for screenings. It's amazing during the London Film Festival. There's also a book market right outside the NFT, where many of my long treasured books that now live in my apartment in Los Angeles come from. On our virtual walk, I'd like to pause here and browse, as I bet they still have vintage Penguin paperbacks in good nick. We're now walking over Waterloo Bridge to the other side. By the way, it's probably going to be very cold today. Wrap up warm. Being on the river, London can be damp and a bit chilly. Scarves are a must, and hats are always useful. We've now arrived at Aldwych. If we keep going straight ahead, we'll get to Covent Garden, but let's do a quick detour first and stop in at the Savoy. If we act as if we belong, we won't get stopped walking in, and can cut through and see the river from the other side. The Savoy makes me think of Noel Coward, who used to stay here. It's the one hotel in the world I've wanted to stay in, but haven't yet. Let's continue on down the Strand and up Long Acre, now to Covent Garden. Clement Dane, a good friend of Noel Coward's, wrote a wonderful book about living in Covent Garden. It's called London Has a Garden, and my own copy is heavily annotated. Let's cut down Charing Cross Road and see if we can find you a copy in one of the many second-hand bookshops there. Now we're at Leicester Place and walking towards the Prince Charles Cinema. This cinema building dates back to the 1960s. Before I started at The Independent, I got some valuable work experience at a film distribution company which represented the German director Monika Treut. I decided, I was all of 22 I think, that she should have a proper first-run movie premiere of her art house picture, and I wrote to the then-new American owners of the Prince Charles. I obviously wrote a good letter, they invited me in and I pitched them the concept, and they agreed. It was jolly exciting doing a premiere, not that I let anyone know I'd never done anything like that before. Next door to the Prince Charles is a church called Notre Dame de Paris. It's a church for French Catholics in London, and Jean Cocteau did a mural on one of the inside walls. Let's go in quietly and take a look. Around the corner is Leicester Square, which dates back to the 17th century when it was the grounds of Robert Sidney, the 2nd Earl of Leicester's grand house. In the very early 80s, or maybe the late 70s, the artist Leigh Bowery created the club Taboo at number 14 Leicester Square, and Boy George worked at the Coat Check before he became a pop star. I went to the 30th birthday of Ian R. Webb, the fashion editor of Elle UK, at Taboo. A friend from university was doing work experience on Elle and got us on the guest list. However, we were both penniless students without cash for high fashion or the talent to whip up outlandish outfits, so we went in matching LBDs, little black dresses, Dr. Martens shoes, bobbed hair, and long strands of fake pearls hung all around our necks and hanging down our backs. It was an amazing occasion. I don't recall much of it, but it was pretty fabulous. Side note, I ended up interviewing Boy George when I was writing for an Australian magazine in the mid-90s. I was incredibly starstruck, but I think I hid it well. Okay, let's cut through Chinatown and into Soho. I don't remember the first time I went to Soho. I just know that as soon as I discovered Soho, it was where I headed first on every trip to London. After graduation, I moved into London and stayed there for a decade. During that time, I lived in many different areas and postcodes, starting in Herne Hill with fellow ex-students and ending up in Butler's Wharf via the Barbican after several more, let's say, precarious housing situations, including Gray's Inn buildings. But I spent most of my time, when not at work, hanging out in Soho. If I ever get back to England to live there again, I'm going to rent an apartment in Soho for a year just to see what it's like. Let's return to 1989, though, and continue our virtual walk. We're now in the heart of Soho, strolling slowly down Old Compton Street and popping into Presto to eat cheap and cheerful pasta. Oh, wonderful. Derek Jarman, who lives opposite St. Martin's on Charing Cross Road, is at his usual table. After lunch, we'll head down to the bottom of Old Compton Street and cross into Wardour Street. While at university, I started shooting pictures and had access to a darkroom to make prints, but sometimes I would bring the rolls of film into town to get contact sheets made at Joe's basement on Wardour Street. While the technicians were processing my stuff, I'd sit in Bar Italia at the counter round the corner. Over there is Broadwick Street. It used to be the headquarters for Hearst's UK magazine business. They've moved elsewhere now, but I was a digital consultant there from 1999 to 2001 before I emigrated. Are we suitably caffeinated now? Okay, we'll cut back through Berwick Street Market and look for vintage vinyl, buy slinky satin at the theatrical costume suppliers, and fruit from the market stalls. Do you have a sweet tooth? I'll treat you to a dainty French cake at Maison Berthaud. We'll order our pots of tea from Michelle as we enter, then tell her we're going upstairs where the cool people like Lee McQueen like to sit. Look over the road. That's Kettner's. Established in 1867 by Auguste Kettner, chef de Napoleon III. Kettner's was one of the first restaurants in London to serve French food, and it's where Oscar Wilde spent many a languid hour, alone or otherwise. Oxford Street is probably too busy for our virtual stroll. Let's sit on a bench and catch our breath in Soho Square before heading down to Regent Street and into Hanover Square, waving hello to the Vogue offices en route. Later, in my late 20s, I worked at Condé Nast, but not inside Vogue House. I had a desk in their nascent digital department in temporary offices circa 1997 when they launched the original Vogue and GQ websites. From Hanover Square, we'll walk up to the BBC at the top of Portland Place and then continue on to the Wallace Collection to see the Fragonard and Watteau paintings from Rococo-era 18th century France. They might be too pretty for some, but this is my virtual tour and I'd love you to see them. Do you need a little retail therapy? I imagine you'd like to buy some gifts to take home. I suggest we start at Selfridges and then take the 94 bus to Jermyn Street and buy, lemon soaps at Floris, cotton handkerchiefs at Dunhill, lace-up Oxfords at Church's, and a crisp blue shirt at Tumble and Asser. We can also stop by Fortnum's and stock up on tea. Here's the bus now. I always sit at the top at the front. It's the best view. Maybe later we'll attend a party, an art show gallery opening, or a lecture at the ICA. I spent many evenings on the Mall learning about semiotics, postmodernism, and other late 80s cultural theories. Or we'll jump on the Northern Line and go to King's Cross and watch a double bill of foreign films at the Scala. It's late now. The last train back to university has gone, and there isn't a night bus which goes out that far, but I have a plan. I sometimes crash at a friend's place in Greenwich overlooking Blackheath. It's a large Edwardian house split into flats, with a portrait of Salvador Dali painted in the kitchen right at the top. Lots of actors, painters, sculptors, and dancers live there. If we bring a pint of milk and a loaf of bread for breakfast, I'm sure they'll find us somewhere to sleep. Do you have a 10-pence piece? I can use that phone box over there to call Miles. We're sorted. Do you have your one-day travel pass? If we run to the Jubilee line and get the connecting bus, we'll be there before midnight, before it runs out. Then, if we wake up early enough, let's go and catch the sunrise over Primrose Hill and get a proper British breakfast at a real English cafe. It's been wonderful taking this virtual stroll around the city with you today. Thank you for your company.